Welcome to another Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Joe Tumalo, CEO of PG Partner, with my guest today, Casey Summar. Welcome, Casey.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Joe.
My pleasure. All the way on the West Coast.
All right, sunny Santa Barbara, California.
No rain. We were just talking about rain. We're in the summer here, and you said you haven't had rain since March.
Nope, and we'll be lucky to get some before the end of the year. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
thanks for taking the time to do this. And you are an attorney by trade.
that's right. Yes, I am the managing partner of the law firm for nonprofits, which is exactly what it sounds like, a law firm that works exclusively with nonprofits. And that's been my practice area my whole career. I've been practicing about 20 years now.
Awesome. And we talked earlier about registration, charitable registration, the thing that most people really don't like to talk about. And I don't like talking about it as a consultant, but we have to do it. And the big question I had, because it came, I won't name states, but I got so for the consultants out there, I think this is really important. I got a notice from a state regarding a client of mine registered in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
90, and I'm consulting, 98% of the donors are in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Delaware, but most in Pennsylvania. And they were saying, I have to be registered as a consultant because they have a handful of donors that live in that state. It just, in 20 some years of doing this, I've never heard that.
Yeah, we get this call often, and part of the challenge is, each state has different rules and different regulations. So we're dealing with a patchwork. Some states don't require any registration. Some states only require registration if you have custody of funds, right? So if you're someone who can actually receive the donation on behalf of the charity, you're holding the funds, you're passing them on. I think that makes logical sense to all of us, right? Like if you get to hold on to charitable donations, we want to make sure you're on the up and up. But then other states, about half of them, have registrations for consultants that are advising on fundraising strategy, but are not ever holding funds. They're not, ever actually kind of out there even making the ask. They're just advising the organization. So I think those are the ones that really sneak up on people because, there's so many different requirements, and even just, strategizing on a campaign, sometimes helping plan events can be enough to trigger registration.
Well, as a consultant, we're not soliciting. I guess maybe there's no logic behind it. It is what it is, and right. And they,
Well, there is, I would say the way I think about these kind of regulations when it feels, overly invasive or burdensome to me, I usually zoom way out and think, okay, how have people taken advantage of these systems, or what might bad actors in the field be doing that have triggered this? So if you think about it that way, we have unfortunately seen, and we've actually been involved in a couple of these on behalf of the charity. We've seen some, fundraising consultants in this space that take advantage of charities, that structure the contracts in such a way that they're getting a very significant percentage of funds raised, for example, or right, or they're using the charity's name in ways that are inappropriate, to access funds and access donors, and get their foot in the door. So we have seen charities get taken advantage of even when the funds aren't actually in the consultant's hands. And so I think that's really what drove this. You also have to keep in mind, with fundraising activity going online, right? You have now this ability for people to kind of work from anywhere, solicit from anywhere, put a lot out there. And because of that, it's opened up, there are website platforms, there are all these different things. And those also might be considered, fundraising counsel or a fundraising consultant. So it's everything from, the kind of the individuals like you to companies to technology. Like there's a lot of different things that can trigger that registration requirement. So I think it does make sense when you think about it that way, that if we're going to let someone who's not an employee of, the charity be advising on this strategy, accessing that, donor data, sometimes things like that, and potentially even structuring compensation in ways that might be unreasonable, that's really where the regulators get worried and get involved. So yeah, and you can absolutely was going to say pushback. Maybe a more diplomatic way to say it would be ask questions, share more about what you're actually doing to make sure that you do in fact need to register. So it can be a conversation with the regulators. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the one that I'm talking about. They sent me a letter, or an email first and a letter, and I sent them an email and I said, I'm happy to chat on the phone. This is what we're doing. Actually, for this client now, all we're doing is I have somebody doing database analysis for them. That's it. So, and then I haven't heard from them in a couple of months. So I think you
Yeah.
told me they might pop up again 6 months.
Yeah, they can take time. We've seen inquiries for even for people, posting on social media, right? And some of the social, so let's say you're a social media consultant for a nonprofit. Maybe you're working on their total brand strategy. Some of that strategy, like it would for any nonprofit, includes posts on social media that might invite donations. And they've said, okay, well, maybe you need to register. But there also another thing to know is in many states, like in California, where I'm at, there are minimums too. So if you are a fundraising consultant, you have to be getting paid at least $25,000 for that work specifically to have to register in the state. So what I often do with that is I say, okay, let's look at the overall contract. Like take that social media marketing company, for example. They've got an overall contract that's over 25,000 with the charity, but the percentage that would be allocated to that handful of posts that are actually about, soliciting donations is below that. And that's been accepted before, so when we take in that strategy, typically the regulator will say, oh, okay, you're not, even though the overall contract is more, such a small percentage of it is actually what we would consider fundraising consultation, you're not going to trigger the requirement. So usually just being responsive. The thing you don't want to do is ignore it. I know that's what we're all tempted to do when we get, this kind of, letter that you think this doesn't apply to me. Don't ignore it, right? Because that's when, there's an assumption that ignoring it is not complying, and then there's a reason, right? So if people are, actively kind of refusing to comply, regulators assume, there's a reason, there's something they're hiding or something that they're doing that's inappropriate. So you got to respond, you need to, engage in the conversation, just be transparent, give them the facts. And often the result will be, that you don't have to register. But unfortunately, sometimes they don't tell you that. You'll just never hear from them again. So they don't always, kind of close the case, right? Sometimes they will affirmatively say, great, no registration required. Sometimes that's it. You'll just not hear anything else. So,
But the likelihood of them trying to find me or do something. Look, if they say, look, you need to register, fine, I'll register.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't want a legal, no offense, but I don't want to have to hire an attorney.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's where, that's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to say also the worst case scenario is not the worst case, right? The registration is typically not that burdensome. If you don't actually have custody of funds, then when you do, the registration's a little bit higher, can include sort of background check type information. Some states require you post a bond. So yeah, that's a heavier lift. But for just consulting where you don't have custody of donations, it's typically just, a brief form. It's not that involved. The fees are not very significant. So I often say, I weigh that and say when I get calls from people, I say, well, here's kind of what it'll cost for me to look at it, for us to go back and forth, for me to advocate, or here are some pointers if you want to do that, that work, and then you might weigh whether it would be more cost efficient to just register. And the note would be, if you do register, just keep in mind that if your activity changes, you're no longer consulting with any organizations that are soliciting in the state, you want to let them know again, right? So you want to say, yep, I was registered for a period of time, that contract has ended, I'm now withdrawing, again, as opposed to leaving it out there. Because if you've registered for a time and then you just stop, then they'll assume, that you're not renewing, right? That you're not filing required filings. That makes sense, right? So you want to let them know, I'm no longer active in your state. I'm no longer required to file, rather than just, not filing, because then they'll assume you're overdue or non-compliant.
Okay, because I'll get a couple of states where I had this one obscure client or one specific client no longer. So they did send me a letter for renewal, and I didn't reach out to them. They reached out to me first. And then I said, no, I no longer have that client. And the likelihood that I'm going to have another client in that state is pretty low.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, exactly. So it's just that kind of affirmative acknowledging it, saying, yep, I am, choosing to not renew because I no longer meet the criteria, and then they'll close out your account. The other nice thing about it though is that because we primarily work with charities, and we do occasionally work with consultants or folks like that, but the vast majority of our work is on the charity side. And the nice thing about registration is that it does give charities the ability to look people up and vet them a little bit as well. So I think that's another, when you sort of think of it. And again, someone like yourself has a very reputable practice and, a history and track record and references, but not everyone, necessarily has that. And so if they're wanting to see, is this the particular grant writer or other consultant, are they on the up and up? That's a good place to start. I always say, well, start by looking to see if they're registered. One other note, you were asking kind of what can trigger those letters that you get, right? The letter that you got saying you need to register. The most common reason that people get those is that you were reported most likely on that organization's 990 as one of their fundraising consultants. And then when they filed that report with the state, they do cross-reference them. So they look and they say, oh, look, they paid some professionals to help with fundraising. Are they registered with us? They're not. So that's exactly what kind of triggers those requests.
And that's the client I referenced, or the state and the client. It's exactly what happened. The CFO from the client emailed me and said, this state's giving us a hard time. Are you registered? Blah, blah, blah. And so how would we as consultants know what states we need to register in?
Well, it is something that we do advise clients to be proactive in talking to the charities you work with about it, and just sort of say, again, if the nature of the agreement is likely a fundraising consultant work, then you likely will be reported on the 990s. And so then you might just ask, what states do you file this in? Can you provide me a copy of the filing, or just things like that? So you're prepared to kind of anticipate where you might get those inquiries from. Sometimes when the work is perhaps doesn't really squarely fit that definition. I'm thinking of an example we had recently that the person was an event planner. The event they were planning was a gala. It was a fundraising gala, but their services were purely event planning. I mean, they were, organizing the chairs, the rentals, they were not advising on strategy for fundraising at all. They were literally just logistics of the event. But because the organization reported them as one of those fundraising consultants on their 990, it started this whole, cycle, and it happened so many times to that poor organization that they started actually adding to their contract, like, please note, we are providing, event coordination services only, no fundraising strategy. Please do not report us as a fundraising consultant on your, because it was costing them a lot to have to respond to all of those requests, and like I said, they were doing fundraising strategy. Well, they should register, but they really weren't. It was pure logistics, so yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Casey, thank you so much. Incredibly helpful and well done for all us providers to nonprofits. Thank you. And so how can we on the providing part, utilize your services, or can we, and do we have to be in certain states?
Oh yeah, thank you for asking that. So the firm, we like to say we help good people do good things by advising on nonprofit and tax exempt law compliance. This type of charitable registrations for both charities and professionals definitely is right squarely within our expertise. So we welcome folks to call on us. We do have attorneys all over the country now. We're a small team, but we're scattered in each time zone now. So, you can call on us, and chances are we'll have someone who can work in that state. And if not, we'll get you in the hands of one of our trusted colleagues that can.
And how can people get in touch with you?
So the website's the best place to start. So it's as our acronym for the firm, lfnp.com, as in law firm, nonprofit, lfnp.com. You can reach us through there, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. And yeah, thanks for the chance to visit, Joe. Always happy to talk charity registration with anybody who will listen.
I'm not, but you are. You're the only one.
Right,
No,
exactly.
incredibly helpful. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you, Casey.
My pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
See you again.